save her or condemn her. The Apache warrior used her sacred law to imprison him. The sun was just rising over the rugged hills of the Apache territory. The village lay in a small valley surrounded by rocky cliffs, where the wind whispered secrets from long ago. Smoke curled gently from the small huts made of wood and earth. Children were already awake, chasing each other around the fire pits, laughing as their feet stirred up dust in the early light. Women were preparing food, grinding corn and checking the small gardens for fresh vegetables. Life was simple, but it was life that demanded respect and constant care. Every action, every word had meaning. The villagers lived by rules older than memory, rules that kept them safe and united. Among these rules, one person stood out more than the others because she understood them deeply: Nayeli. Nayeli was young, but she carried herself with a calm strength that made people notice her. Her hair was long and black, tied neatly with simple cords, and her eyes were sharp, always watching and listening. People in the village knew her as someone who respected the traditions, someone who knew the sacred laws, and someone who could act wisely when danger appeared. Her father, who had passed many seasons ago, had been a leader, and her mother, a skilled healer, had taught her to see the world clearly and not act in anger. Nayeli had learned to balance courage with patience, knowing that hasty decisions often brought harm. One morning, as the village was settling into the calm of early day, a rider appeared on the horizon. Dust rose from his horse as he approached, his figure tall and imposing. The villagers paused their work and watched him carefully. He was not from their tribe, and he did not carry the respectful air that outsiders sometimes held when they entered Apache lands. His eyes were sharp, and his smile did not reach them. It was a smile that made people uneasy. Nayeli, standing near the edge of the village, noticed him immediately. Something about his presence did not sit right. She felt a familiar stir of caution, the kind that elders had taught her to trust. The stranger dismounted near the communal fire. His name was Tay, though at first he did not reveal much about himself. He claimed to be a traveler, someone who had lost his way and needed shelter for the night. He spoke smoothly, his words polite, but his eyes carried a subtle threat that Nayeli recognized. She remembered stories of outsiders who had entered their lands and caused trouble, often ignoring the sacred laws that guided their people. Nayeli's heart tightened. She could sense that this man was not just lost. He had intentions that were not clear and probably dangerous. As he settled in, Nayeli observed him carefully. He watched the villagers as if measuring them, noting who spoke, who worked, who laughed. When he looked at her, Nayeli felt the weight of his gaze. It was as if he were trying to see through her, to understand her thoughts. She did not flinch. Instead, she let her calmness show, making sure her face revealed nothing. She had learned that courage did not always roar. Sometimes it waited quietly, ready to act when the moment was right. Over the next few days, Tay began to move more freely through the village. He offered help with small tasks, like carrying water or stacking firewood, but his gestures felt calculated, like a performance. Nayeli noticed him speaking to certain young men, asking questions about the land, the elders, and the sacred sites. He never asked directly about the women, but Nayeli's instincts told her that he was testing boundaries, seeking weaknesses. She could not ignore this. The sacred law of her people gave her responsibility, not just to her family but to the entire village. The law was not written on paper, but it was stronger than any weapon. It spoke of justice, protection, and the balance of life. Nayeli had spent years learning it, and she understood that sometimes justice needed courage and careful action. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the cliffs, Nayeli decided to follow Tay from a distance. She moved silently through the rocks and low bushes, keeping to shadows and using the knowledge of her land. She saw him approaching the edge of the village, moving toward the storage huts where food and tools were kept. Nayeli's heart beat faster. She could see his hands reaching for a bundle of supplies, but it was not the theft that worried her, it was the intent behind it. Tay's movements were precise, controlled, and deliberate. She sensed that he was testing limits, seeing what he could take or disrupt without being noticed. Naomi stepped out of the shadows, her voice calm but firm. "Tay," she said. He froze, turning to look at her. There was a flicker of surprise in his eyes, quickly replaced by a smirk. "Do you always follow strangers at night?" he asked, his tone teasing but edged with challenge. Naomi did not answer with words meant to anger him. Instead, she spoke with the authority of her people. "I follow no one out of fear. I follow because the sacred law requires it. There are things you cannot see, but I can. You will not harm this place, not while I live." Her words carried weight, and the villagers nearby, who had been watching from a distance, felt the power in her voice. Tay laughed lightly, but it was a short, uneasy sound. He did not expect a young woman to speak with such confidence, and he certainly did not expect her to understand the laws that governed the land so well. Naomi's eyes did not waver. She knew that the law gave her authority, but authority alone was not enough. She needed to act wisely to protect without causing unnecessary harm. The next day, Naomi approached the elders to speak of her concerns. They listened carefully, their faces serious. "We have felt his presence," one elder said. "There is a shadow in his steps." "You are right to be cautious, Naomi." They reminded her that the sacred law gave her the power to protect the village, but also required that she act with respect and care. Her decision must be balanced, or it could bring dishonor to the village and to herself. Naomi nodded. She understood that the path ahead was not easy. Protecting her people meant walking a line between courage and wisdom, between justice and mercy. In the days that followed, Naomi observed Tay more closely. She noticed small things that others overlooked. The way he scanned the village entrances, the way his fingers lingered near tools that were not his, the faint marks of a plan being laid out. Naomi realized that he was dangerous not because of violence, but because of cleverness and cunning. He believed he could manipulate people, and that belief made him unpredictable. Naomi knew that confronting him with force alone could be risky. Instead, she decided to rely on the sacred law, an ancient practice that could hold him accountable in ways beyond physical strength. One evening, as the sky turned pink and gold, Naomi approached Tay again, this time with a clearer purpose. She did not carry weapons, only the knowledge of the law and her own courage. "You have tested the patience of this village," she said. "You have come under our roof, yet you seek to break our rules. The sacred law allows me to act, to bind those who threaten the peace and life of the people. You will answer, and you will learn that the land and its people are not weak." Tay's smile faded. For the first time, he felt uncertainty. Naomi's calm authority, backed by the weight of tradition, made him realize that his usual tactics of intimidation might not work here. He looked around, seeing the villagers quietly watching from their homes. The children peeking from behind fences, the elders nodding slightly in approval, the women standing firmly with baskets in hand. All of them were witnesses to this moment. Naomi's presence was not alone. It was supported by generations of wisdom, by laws that had kept the village safe through seasons of danger and hardship. That night, Naomi returned to her hut, but sleep did not come easily. Her mind was full of questions. How far would she have to go to protect the village? How would she use the sacred law without harming the balance of life? She remembered the stories her mother had told her of women and men who had faced choices that were not easy, of leaders who had to act when the world seemed uncertain. Naomi understood that courage was not always loud, and wisdom was not always celebrated immediately. Sometimes it was in quiet, careful actions that life was saved. The villagers, meanwhile, whispered among themselves. Some admired Naomi, feeling relief that someone young and brave could protect them. Others were uncertain, fearing that challenging an outsider so boldly could bring trouble. But deep down, everyone knew that Naeli spoke with truth, with the law of the people, and that truth was stronger than any weapon. They watched as she moved among them, calm and determined, knowing that her choices in the coming days would decide not only the fate of one stranger but the safety and honor of the entire village. As the sun set and the valley grew quiet, a sense of anticipation filled the air. Naeli stood on a small hill at the edge of the village, looking down at the homes, the fires, and the people she was sworn to protect. She knew that tomorrow would bring a test unlike any she had faced before. Tay's intentions would soon be revealed fully, and the sacred law would need to be used. Naeli's heart was steady. She felt the responsibility, but also the strength that came from knowing she was guided by wisdom older than herself. The wind whispered through the cliffs, carrying the scent of earth and sage. Naeli felt it as a quiet reminder that she was not alone. The land, the spirits, the ancestors, and the people, together, they formed a circle that no danger could easily break. Naeli took a deep breath. She was ready to face what was coming. The next morning, the village awoke to a quiet tension in the air. Birds chirped and the wind blew softly through the cliffs, but there was a subtle weight in the valley. Naeli moved among the huts, greeting people calmly, yet her mind was alert. Every glance she gave, every step she took was measured. Tay had spent the night in his small corner of the village, but she knew that his thoughts were not peaceful. He was plotting, testing the limits of the people's patience, and she needed to be ready. Naeli understood the sacred law better than most. It was an old law, one that guided behavior, maintained peace, and protected the community from harm. It was a law written not on paper, but in the hearts of the people, in the rituals of the land, and in the whispers of the ancestors. The law allowed someone with knowledge and courage to act when danger threatened the village. It could bind a person who intended harm, not always through force but through respect, ritual, and the authority of tradition. Naeli knew the law well, but she also knew it carried responsibility. Misuse of it could bring dishonor, not only to her but to the entire village. As she walked to the edge of the village, Naeli noticed Tay leaving his small hut. He was calm, but there was a confidence in his steps, a feeling that he believed he could outsmart anyone. He glanced around, seeming to measure the boundaries of the village and the reactions of its people. Naeli's heart did not race with fear. Instead, it focused, steady and sharp. She knew that the sacred law was her strength, but she would have to use it carefully, with the right timing and clarity. She approached him slowly, walking with the same calm authority she had shown before. The villagers watched quietly from behind doors and fences. They did not interfere. They had learned that Naeli acted with wisdom and respect. She spoke to Tay, her voice firm, carrying both warning and knowledge. "You have come into this place under the shadow of danger," she said. "I know your intentions. The sacred law of my people gives me the right and the duty to act. You will not harm us, not while I am here to uphold it." Tay's eyes flickered with a mixture of amusement and challenge. "You speak as if a law can stop me," he said, his voice low and mocking. "I have crossed lands where no one dared question me. Do you think I will fear words and traditions?" Naeli did not answer with anger. She did not need to. The sacred law was stronger than threats. She began the ritual that had been taught to her by the elders. She moved with deliberate care, drawing patterns in the dirt, whispering words that carried meaning beyond their sound. The ritual was simple in appearance, but it held the authority of generations. It called upon the village, the spirits of the land, and the watchful eyes of the ancestors to witness the actions of a person who sought to harm the community. As Naeli performed the ritual, Tay tried to step closer, thinking he could interrupt or dismiss her actions. But the villagers, seeing her authority, stepped forward quietly, forming a subtle barrier. They did not touch him, nor did they speak harshly, but their presence reminded him that he was surrounded by a community that respected Naeli and the sacred law. He realized that this was not a threat he could ignore, nor was it an ordinary warning. The binding was already taking shape. Naeli's voice carried softly, but with an undeniable strength. "The law does not favor the reckless or the cruel," she said. "It protects the innocent and holds the guilty accountable. You are here under the watch of the people, the spirits, and the ancestors. You will answer for your actions." Tay's smile faded. For the first time, he felt uncertainty. He had faced opposition before, but never with such quiet power. Naeli did not raise her voice. She did not move aggressively. Her strength lay in knowledge, confidence, and the law itself. The ritual, simple in its outward appearance, created a web that bound him, not with chains, but with the recognition of the village and the authority of tradition. Over the next few days, Tay found himself restricted in ways he had not expected. Villagers refused to speak freely with him. Children avoided him, sensing the tension. Food and water were offered only under Naeli's direction, a subtle but firm way of showing that the law demanded accountability. Tay tried to challenge this, walking among the villagers, testing their patience, questioning the fairness of Naeli's actions. But every attempt met quiet resistance. People respected the law, and they respected Naeli's careful use of it. Naeli remained calm, but she was not idle. She observed Tay, studying his movements, listening to his words, and measuring the effect of her actions. She knew that punishment alone was not enough. The sacred law required balance. It required that a person be given the chance to understand their wrongdoing and, if possible, to correct it. Naeli was careful to maintain this balance. She spoke to Tay privately, reminding him of the choices he had made, of the harm his actions could cause, and of the strength of the community he had underestimated. Tay reacted in different ways. Sometimes he grew frustrated, raising his voice or making sharp movements. Other times he seemed thoughtful, pausing in silence as if considering the power he had ignored. Naeli never lost her calm. She knew that control was not about fear, but about understanding and respect. She offered him guidance, showing that the law was not only about confinement but about opportunity for reflection and change. The villagers began to notice a shift. Some whispered that Naeli's actions were strict, perhaps even harsh. Others saw her courage and wisdom, recognizing that the sacred law was being used correctly. They saw her not as a ruler, but as a protector, someone who understood the delicate balance between justice and mercy. Tay, meanwhile, continued to test the limits of his confinement, sometimes arguing, sometimes plotting silently, but always aware that the law and Naeli watched him. As the days passed, Naeli introduced small ways for Tay to show understanding and respect. She asked him to perform tasks that required patience and attention, not punishment. He learned to follow simple instructions, to respect the boundaries set by the village, and to understand that his actions had consequences. Naeli's guidance was firm but fair, showing him that the sacred law was not a weapon for personal power, but a shield for the community. One evening, as the sun set behind the cliffs, Naeli spoke to Tay with unusual calmness. "You have tested the people and you have tested the law," she said, "but the law is not cruel. It is a guide, a teacher, and a protector. You may choose to understand it or you may continue to resist. The choice is yours." Tay did not answer immediately. He stood silently, looking at the patterns Naeli had drawn in the dirt, the quiet presence of the villagers, and the calm authority in her eyes. For the first time, he felt that his actions might lead to consequences he could not escape. He began to understand that courage and knowledge could hold a person in ways strength alone could not. Naeli had not raised a hand against him, yet he was contained. He realized that the sacred law was real, powerful, and respected. In the following days, Tay's behavior began to change subtly. He no longer challenged Naeli openly, though his mind still raced with thoughts of escape or defiance. Naeli continued to watch him, guiding him with patience. She spoke of the history of the law, of the spirits who watched over the land, and of the ancestors who had passed down these teachings. Slowly, Tay began to see that the power of the law was not in punishment, but in respect and understanding. The villagers noticed the shift. They saw Tay taking small steps toward acknowledgement of his actions, and they respected Nayeli's careful balance. They knew she was not acting out of anger or personal pride. She was acting as the law required, protecting the village while offering a path for the wrongdoer to learn and change. Her actions became a living example of the law's strength and fairness. Even at night, when the village was quiet and shadows stretched across the valley, Nayeli remained watchful. She walked among the huts, checking on the boundaries she had set, speaking softly to the villagers about caution, respect, and the importance of the law. Tay, now aware of the community's strength and the sacred power that guided it, began to reflect. He could no longer rely on his usual cunning and manipulation. The ritual and the support of the people had created a new kind of cage, one that was invisible but powerful. Nayeli understood that this was only the beginning. The sacred law could bind him, guide him, and protect the village, but the choices Tay made in the coming days would determine the final outcome. She remained calm, steady, and observant, knowing that her courage and wisdom would be tested further. Yet she felt no fear. She had the support of the community, the guidance of the spirits, and the clarity that came from acting with justice and respect. As the days blended into nights, the tension in the village began to shift from fear to cautious hope. The children played more freely, the women worked with less worry, and the elders spoke in softer tones, trusting that Nayeli's actions were right. Tay, confined not by chains but by the sacred law, began to realize that strength alone could not overcome the power of respect, wisdom, and community. Nayeli had created a balance that even he could not disrupt, and slowly, the first signs of understanding appeared in his eyes. Days passed in the village, and the tension between Nayeli and Tay began to grow in ways that were both quiet and powerful. The village itself seemed to hold its breath, watching the delicate balance that Nayeli had created with the sacred law. Tay, though physically free to walk among the huts, remained confined in ways he could not touch. He could not ignore the watchful eyes of the villagers, nor the authority that Nayeli carried with every movement. Yet inside him, a storm of frustration and cunning continued to grow. Tay's pride would not allow him to admit weakness, even in the smallest way. He began to test the villagers subtly, questioning their actions, observing their routines, and speaking in half-truths meant to confuse them. He would ask simple questions with an edge, seeing how people responded, trying to discover anyone who might side with him. Some of the younger men were momentarily unsettled, unsure whether Nayeli's methods were strict or excessive. They whispered among themselves, questioning whether the sacred law could be applied in this modern way. Nayeli noticed these whispers immediately. She moved calmly among the people, speaking quietly with those who were confused, reminding them of the law and the way it protected their community. "The law is not meant to punish for pride or curiosity," she said gently, "but to maintain respect and safety. Do not be swayed by doubt, for the path of wisdom is not always the easiest to see." Her words, though soft, carried the weight of generations. Slowly, the villagers' hesitation faded, replaced with trust in her guidance. They began to understand that Nayeli's actions were not about power, but about protection. Meanwhile, Tay grew more restless. He could see that the villagers were no longer reacting to his words or actions in the way he had expected. They did not fear him, nor did they try to oppose him directly. Nayeli's authority had created an invisible cage, and he could feel its weight pressing against him every hour. He began to realize that cleverness alone would not allow him to escape. Nayeli had anticipated his moves, and the sacred law was more powerful than any plan he could devise. Frustration turned to anger, and anger to desperation. Tay tried to appeal to the elders, speaking of fairness and justice, twisting his words to suggest that Nayeli's actions were personal rather than lawful. "She acts as if she controls everything," he said quietly, hoping someone would agree. "She decides what is right and wrong without listening to me. This is not justice, it is punishment for me alone." But the elders were wise and they saw through his words. They spoke calmly, addressing the concerns of the village without anger. "Nayeli acts with respect for the law and for the people," one elder said. "The law is not hers alone. She guides us, but it is the law that protects the village. The choice of action is not about her pride or power. It is about the balance of life and safety." Tay has tested that balance, and the consequences follow naturally. Nayeli observed this from a distance. She felt the weight of responsibility pressing on her shoulders more heavily than before. She understood that the law could bind Tay physically, socially, and spiritually, but it could not reach his thoughts. That was where her next challenge lay. She needed to guide him not only to respect the law but to understand it and perhaps even accept it. This was a delicate task, for forcing understanding too harshly could provoke resistance, and too gently could allow deception. One afternoon, Nayeli decided to confront Tay directly, speaking to him alone near the edge of the cliffs where the wind carried a quiet authority. "Tay," she said, "you have resisted the law, testing both the people and the spirits. The sacred law is not cruel, but it is powerful. It exists to guide, not to harm. You may continue to resist, but that resistance will only bind you further. You must choose to understand and act with respect." Tay laughed, though it was hollow. "And what if I do not choose?" he asked. "What if I continue as I am? What power do you really have?" Nayeli's eyes met his calmly, unwavering. "I have no power beyond the law," she said. "But the law has power beyond both of us. It holds us accountable and it protects the people who live here. You may challenge me, but the law does not change. It remains." The words struck Tay more deeply than she realized. He had never faced a law that could not be bargained with, manipulated, or ignored. For the first time, he felt that the choices he had made were no longer his alone. They were weighed against generations of tradition, the watchful eyes of a community, and the authority of someone who understood more than he could imagine. That evening, Nayeli returned to the village, walking slowly among the people. She spoke softly with families, reminding them of patience, respect, and the importance of guidance over punishment. Children gathered near her, listening intently, sensing the quiet strength she carried. The elders nodded silently, approving her balance of courage and wisdom. The villagers were beginning to understand the deeper meaning of the sacred law, not as a tool of control, but as a framework for life, justice, and protection. Tay, meanwhile, grew more restless. He attempted small tricks, moving items, speaking sharply, trying to provoke anger. But each time, Nayeli's presence and the village's quiet authority reminded him that he could not act freely. The sacred law had created a cage that was invisible yet unbreakable. He realized that he could no longer rely solely on cunning or intimidation. He had to reckon with the reality of the situation. Nayeli continued to guide him subtly, offering ways to demonstrate respect and responsibility. She asked him to carry water to the elders, to help repair fences, and to observe rituals with care. Each task was designed not as punishment, but as a lesson in patience, humility, and understanding. Tay completed the tasks reluctantly at first, but gradually he began to recognize that his actions mattered, and that the sacred law was more than words or ritual. It was a living framework that shaped the lives of everyone in the village. The villagers observed these changes with quiet attention. They whispered to one another about the strength and wisdom of Nayeli, noting how she balanced firmness with fairness. Some were impressed, others cautious, but all recognized that the law was working. Even those who had doubted her authority began to respect her decisions, seeing the results in Tae's slow transformation. One evening, as the sun set behind the cliffs and painted the sky with deep oranges and reds, Naeli spoke to Tae again. "You have resisted and tested us," she said, "but the law does not seek to destroy, it seeks to guide. You may continue in anger or you may begin to learn. The choice is yours." Tae remained silent, looking at the patterns of dust and stone beneath his feet, feeling the weight of her words and the reality of the situation. For the first time, he recognized that escape, defiance, or anger would bring him nothing. The sacred law was more than rules. It was a force that shaped life, and he could not escape it through strength alone. The days turned into weeks, and Tae began to change more noticeably. He still carried the remnants of pride and defiance, but he also began to listen, observe, and act with care. Naeli guided him, balancing firmness with opportunity. She allowed him small freedoms, but always reminded him of the responsibility that came with them. Slowly, he began to understand that the law was not a punishment. It was a path, a teacher, and a protection for those who lived under it. Naeli continued to speak to the villagers about patience, courage, and understanding. She reminded them that the law was not just for Tae, but for all who lived in the village. Its power lay in guiding actions, maintaining respect, and protecting the community. The people began to see the wisdom in her actions, appreciating the careful balance she had maintained. Even at night, when the village was quiet and the stars glimmered above, Naeli remained vigilant. She walked among the huts, checking on boundaries, observing behaviors, and quietly reinforcing the lessons of the sacred law. Tae, aware of the invisible cage around him, began to reflect on his actions, realizing that his previous ways of thinking and acting were no longer sufficient. He had been bound not by chains, but by respect, wisdom, and the authority of the law. The village began to settle into a new rhythm. Children played safely, women worked without fear, and elders spoke with calm assurance. Naeli had not only maintained safety, but also strengthened the bonds between the villagers. Tae, confined by the sacred law and guided by her wisdom, began to see the value of respect, patience, and humility. Naeli knew that the next steps would be critical. She had brought Tae to the point of understanding, but the ultimate choice was still his. The law could guide, protect, and teach, but it could not force the heart. She would need to remain vigilant, ready to act if he faltered, yet patient enough to allow growth and reflection. As the sun rose the next morning, casting golden light over the valley, Naeli stood on a small hill at the edge of the village. She looked down at the homes, the fires, and the people she had sworn to protect. Tae moved among them, his posture slowly changing, showing small signs of respect and awareness. Naeli's heart was steady. She knew that the sacred law had done its work, but the final test was still to come. The choices of the coming days would determine whether justice and mercy could truly coexist. The wind carried a quiet reminder from the cliffs and the spirits of the land. The path of balance is never easy, but it is always necessary. Naeli breathed deeply, feeling the strength and responsibility in her chest. She was ready for what would come next, knowing that courage, wisdom, and the sacred law would guide her through the challenges that still lay ahead. The days in the village had settled into a quiet rhythm, but an invisible tension lingered. Everyone could feel it, like a thin line stretched tight across the valley, ready to snap. Naeli moved through the village with calm steps, observing, guiding, and protecting. Tae had changed in small ways, showing glimpses of respect and thoughtfulness, yet there remained a spark of defiance in his eyes. Naeli knew that the final test had arrived, the moment when the sacred law would either secure peace or face its greatest challenge. That morning, Naeli called a small gathering at the central fire. The villagers, young and old, assembled quietly, sitting in a wide circle. Children peered from behind the adults, curious but obedient. The elders stood at the edge, their faces grave but trusting in Naeli's judgment. Tay was present, standing a little apart, his gaze flicking between the people and Naeli. The air was heavy with anticipation, yet there was also a sense of calm because everyone knew that Naeli's actions were fair and guided by wisdom. Naeli began to speak, her voice steady and clear. "We have lived together in this place for many seasons," she said. "The sacred law exists not to punish, but to guide. It is meant to protect the people, maintain balance, and teach responsibility. Tay has entered our village under the shadow of danger, and he has tested both our patience and the law itself. Today, we must see whether justice and understanding can truly exist together." The villagers listened silently. Even Tay felt the weight of her words. For the first time, he realized that the law was not just a set of rules. It was the spirit of the community, a living presence that could not be ignored. Naeli had guided him patiently, but now the moment had come for him to make a choice that would determine his path forward. She walked slowly toward him, her eyes calm but unyielding. "Tay," she said, "the law has shown you the path of reflection and responsibility. You have resisted, but you have also been guided. You now have the choice: continue in defiance or acknowledge your actions and accept the guidance of the law. The consequences of your choice are yours alone." Tay hesitated. Inside, he wrestled with pride, fear, and curiosity. He could feel the invisible weight of the sacred law pressing down on him, reminding him that he could not simply act as he pleased. He looked at the villagers and saw their trust in Naeli, their quiet confidence that the law was right. Slowly, he began to understand that strength alone had never protected him. It was wisdom, respect, and unity that truly held power. After a long pause, he spoke quietly. I understand," he said, though his voice trembled slightly. "I have tested the village and the law. I have acted without respect, and I see now that my actions were wrong. I am ready to accept the guidance of the law." A soft murmur spread through the villagers. Some nodded in approval, while others held their breath, waiting to see how Naeli would respond. She stepped closer, her face calm, her eyes filled with quiet authority. "The law does not seek vengeance," she said. "It seeks balance. By acknowledging your actions, you begin a path not only of responsibility but also of renewal. You will live among us under the protection and guidance of the sacred law, learning to act with respect, courage, and wisdom." Tay lowered his head, feeling the weight of both relief and responsibility. He realized that the village had given him a chance few outsiders ever received. He had been tested, and now he had the opportunity to change, to become someone who understood the power of respect, community, and law. Naeli's calm authority had not only contained him but had offered him the possibility of growth. Over the next days, Tay began to work closely with Naeli and the villagers. He helped repair homes, tended to the gardens, and assisted the elders in simple tasks. Each action reinforced the lessons of the sacred law, that every choice has meaning, that respect must guide behavior, and that strength is best used in service of the community rather than in defiance of it. Slowly, Tay's pride softened, replaced by a quiet humility. He began to see the value of the law not as a punishment, but as a guide to living with care and wisdom. The villagers, in turn, observed his progress with cautious optimism. They noticed the subtle changes in his demeanor, the way he moved with more care, the way he spoke more gently, and the way he began to listen before acting. Naeli's guidance had created a transformation, not through fear or violence, but through patience, authority, and the moral power of the sacred law. One afternoon, Naeli gathered the villagers once more to reflect on the journey they had experienced. She spoke of courage, of wisdom, and of the importance of standing by the law even when challenges arise. "The sacred law is a living thing," she said. "It teaches us not only to protect ourselves but also to guide others toward understanding. Justice does not always come in the form of punishment. Sometimes, it comes in the form of guidance, opportunity, and patience. Tay listened quietly, understanding that he was no longer just an outsider testing the village. He was part of a community that had shown him strength, patience, and mercy. The lessons he had learned under Nayeli's guidance would stay with him forever. He began to feel a connection to the land, to the people, and to the sacred law that he had once tried to ignore. As the sun set over the cliffs, casting long shadows across the valley, the village felt a sense of calm that had been absent for weeks. The tension that had once held the air tight had loosened, replaced by quiet harmony. Children played freely, women worked in their gardens, and elders spoke with peaceful voices. Nayeli walked among them, observing, guiding, and protecting. She felt the weight of responsibility, but also the satisfaction of seeing justice balanced with mercy. Tay, for his part, began to act not out of fear of the law, but out of respect for it. He assisted the villagers without complaint, learned from Nayeli's guidance, and began to earn the trust that had been absent in the first days of his arrival. The sacred law had achieved what weapons or threats could not. It had transformed a person's heart while maintaining the safety and harmony of the community. One evening, Nayeli walked to the edge of the cliffs alone, feeling the cool wind brush against her face. She looked down at the village, the fires flickering in the gathering dusk, and reflected on the journey they had taken. The sacred law had been tested, challenged, and upheld. Tay had been guided, not condemned. The village had been protected, not threatened. And she, as a young woman of courage and wisdom, had walked the path of responsibility with care, patience, and strength. The wind whispered through the cliffs, carrying the scent of sage and earth, and Nayeli felt a quiet reassurance. The law, the spirits, and the ancestors were still watching, and she had acted with honor. The balance of justice and mercy had been maintained. She smiled softly, knowing that the village would continue to thrive under the guidance of the sacred law, and that the lessons learned would remain in the hearts of everyone who had witnessed them. In the following weeks, Tay continued to integrate into the village. He shared stories of his past, apologized for his previous actions, and worked diligently alongside the people he had once sought to challenge. Nayeli observed him, guiding when necessary, but also allowing him the space to demonstrate understanding. The villagers noticed his transformation, and their initial hesitation turned into acceptance. They began to see that change was possible when guided by wisdom, law, and compassion. The village itself seemed to breathe more freely. Children ran across the open fields without fear, women sang softly as they worked, and elders shared quiet conversations about the strength and courage of Nayeli. She had shown that leadership was not about force or fear, but about knowledge, patience, and moral courage. Tay's transformation had also demonstrated that even those who enter with ill intent could learn respect and responsibility if guided wisely. One night, as the stars appeared over the cliffs and the valley glowed in soft moonlight, Nayeli stood near the central fire, watching the village settle into peaceful sleep. She reflected on the journey of the past weeks, the challenges faced, and the choices made. She understood that true courage was not always in battle, but in guiding others, upholding the law, and balancing justice with mercy. The sacred law had been tested, and it had held strong, offering protection, guidance, and opportunity for transformation. Tay, now a changed presence among the villagers, approached Nayeli quietly. "Thank you," he said softly. "I did not understand at first, but I see now the power of the law, and I see your wisdom. You did not condemn me. You guided me, and in that, I have learned more than I could have anywhere else." Nayeli nodded gently. "The law does not belong to me alone," she replied. "It belongs to the people, to the land, and to the spirits who watch over us. My task was to act with courage and respect, to maintain balance, and to protect the village. You have chosen to understand and learn. That is your path forward." The village slept peacefully that night, the cliffs standing silent as guardians over the homes and fields. The sacred law remained alive in the hearts of the people, guiding actions, teaching responsibility, and protecting life. Nayeli, young yet wise, had fulfilled her role with honor and courage. Tay had been transformed, not through force, but through patience, wisdom, and the power of the law. And the village, united and strong, would continue to thrive, carrying forward the lessons of justice, mercy, and moral courage for generations to come. The sun rose again over the cliffs the next morning, casting golden light across the valley. Nayeli walked among the villagers, her heart steady and calm. The journey had been challenging, but the sacred law had prevailed. Tay, now a responsible member of the community, worked alongside them with care and respect. And the village, protected and guided, moved forward into each new day with balance, harmony, and quiet strength.